everybody, welcome back. A little bit late with this video. Normally I put one out Saturday or Sunday, but here it is. There's the next installment. I think it's number 5. So today, or this evening, I'm going to tie probably a more traditional pattern, I guess, with a little bit of a spin on it. So it's a muddler pattern in the true spirit of what a muddler would look like, with a twist on it, and the twist being, you know, it's a much more much more flashy muddler version. It's one that I use a long time ago in Labrador, and found it very effective when other muddlers didn't work so well. And the only version I tied really was in silver. But I know, you know, I've seen other versions since, similar styles tied in all kinds of colors, purple particularly. So I think this particular pattern tied in multiple colors would work probably pretty effective, even for probably even sea trout and a few other species here on the island. So the pattern itself is a little bit of a spin on what the original looked like. So this is the pattern in silver. So it's called a Flash Muddler for purposes of naming and what's on the website. It's called a Flash Muddler, and it's a silver. Yeah, and that's traditionally the color. I've tied them in gold as well, but I find silver is much better. This one is done a little bit differently. So I've tied them with a traditional tinsel chenille. I don't have any here close that I can show you, but I'm sure, just look it up if you're not familiar with tinsel chenille. It's just a very simple type of typical chenille that you'd find only in like I say, in a tinsel, and in silver. So the original pattern had a tinsel chenille body. This one's got a little bit of a spin on it. And for purposes of what I've been doing here with all these patterns, really is trying to sort of demonstrate the use of materials that are maybe non-typical for some of the local waters, and sort of a spin on some of the original versions that have worked for me over the years. So this one works well in this version as well. So, you know, if you're in those waters, you want to, in areas you want to give it a try, I suggest you tie it with both versions, you know, the tinsel body as well as with this polar chenille body, and I'll show you that in a second when we get to it. So lots of flash in the wing, typical muddler shape, mottled brown or mottled turkey wings and tail, and those are from a local wild turkey tails is what I'm using here, and I'll show you that in a second. And some tricks or some little tidbits of information when it comes to putting in those wings and tails that might help you if you've ever tied muddlers and had any struggle with them. If anybody is familiar with the way I tie my muddlers, you'll notice is a traditional or a more typical style that I use, and that is with a very large head. And that's just the way I like them. They push a lot of water, and you know, if you get to a situation where you want a deeper diving minnow, you want something that's a little sleeker looking, then, you know, with a knife or a pair of scissors handy on the water, you can trim that head down to whatever size you want. You can't add material, but you can easily take it away. So, but really, I like a really full collar and a really a fairly large head. And this is a number 4. So the collar on these, I usually tie my collars fairly heavy, and I'll show you that when I get into it as well, how I do it. So without any further explanation, I'll get going. Today, like I said, instead of a silver, I'm going to do one in purple, because, you know, it just shows you that you can do whatever color you want. The technique's the same, of course. It's just the material color selections is different. So instead of the silver body and the silver flash, we'll be using purple. And okay, let's get started. So the hook that I'm using here is just a standard 3X9672 Mustad. You can use all kinds of different brands. Daiichi got equivalents and TMCos and all that good stuff, but that's what we're going to use here today. Okay, so the thread I'm using for the main part of this fly is just a UTC 70 You don't need to use anything really heavy. It's, again, you're laying in materials that don't require a lot of extra effort when it comes to pressure, so you don't need an extra strong thread, but you want something that's fairly strong. I like this one because it lies fairly flat as well. One thing about these muddlers, and you'll see it with all the flies I tie, well, most of the flies I do, particularly those that require sort of segmentation in the bodies. What I mean by that is a division between, say, head and body or whatever. I'll always, and you'll see this in books a lot as well, and you'll see it on videos from many tires, and they'll always recommend the same thing, and that is wherever your head, wherever you want your head to start, kind of start your thread there. So don't start your thread back right at the eye. Start your thread wherever your head is going to be, and this is about 3 eye lengths back, roughly, is where I lay these muddler heads. It kind of depends on the size of the hook, but after you tie a few of these, you'll get a sense of what makes sense to you, of what the typical head size would look like. So we'll start here around 3, like I say, around 3 eye lengths back or eye lengths back from the eye to hook. So base of thread, wrap it right up to basically opposite the barb. Excuse me, guys, the desk here is a mess, so that's what you get for tying multiple patterns at the same time. First thing you tie in your tail. Now your tail's at a turkey as well, so these are the two. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this on camera. These are big feathers. These are wild turkey tails, or turkey feathers. And you'll notice there's a left and a right, so you'll need both. You'll see them turn different ways here. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this on the camera sensibly, but you'll see that the feather is turned in opposite directions, right? So he's turned out and turned in. And you get 2 sides of the feather. So you got your long side, which is a much thinner profile or a much thinner material, and then you got your short back end of the quill, I guess you call it, which is a much more stiffer, coarser type material. So to make the use out of these, because typically to buy them are fairly expensive, someone happened to give me these, so it's great if you can find that. I use the back end of the tail, or back end of the quill, let's call it, for the tails, and then I use the opposite end for the wings, and I'll show you in a second. So I clip off roughly, I typically tie maybe half the gap in width of the quill, so I'll show you now. So basically take one side, clip it, and then the other side on the short side. So you got a lot of gnarly stuff here. You want to use that. Use up here in the decent stuff. Now, you wouldn't be able to use, if you had one of these quills, you'd see what I was talking about. It's probably hard to see on camera, but the quill stem, the feather itself is fairly thick. If you tried to use this for a wing, it would practically be impossible, because it'll always turn over on you because it's so thick. And that's why for the tails it works fine, but not for the wings. So you got the 2 quill feathers, lay them against each other, and not flared apart. Lay them against each other so they're turned inward on each other. And again, I don't know if others do it this way. This is the way I'm doing it, just to make the most out of the feather. And I find that's what I've been doing for years, and seems to work quite well. Basically, that's your tail. Just push this one up a bit further. Line them up as best you can. Okay. Tail's about the length of the gap of the hook. Pinch, wrap. Pinch, hold. Pull down. Keep tension on your bobbin, and then wrap forward. Don't wrap, always wrap forward, don't wrap back. You wrap back, you're going to turn that feather over on its end, over on its side. So that's pretty good. And I usually trim this off back to where I started. That gives me a little bit of a base, and wrap this down. It gives me evens out the body, basically. Now the traditional muddler uses, like I said, uses a flat tinsel body. This one, of course, don't. And even when I'm tying traditional muddlers, I don't use flat tinsel anymore. I'm sure Don Gapin wouldn't mind since he's the creator of this pattern. I use a lot of braids, but so on this particular pattern, like I said, whereas we had silver here, as I showed you before, is a silver UV polar chenille. This is the product here. It's a hairline. It comes in there's other brands you can buy. Senus have one out. Aquavale, I think, is very similar. There's a longer version of this one. This one is be sure to get the medium, because the normal polar chenille has got maybe fibers that are 2 to 3 times longer, which again, if that's your preference, fine, but I use those sort of on collars and in streamers, whereas these here, I typically use them on bodies. So if you haven't worked with this stuff before, it's not a whole lot to it. It's just it's like a tinsel that's woven into a yarn base, I guess you call it. And that's really all is to it. And the base itself is it's all dyed purple, of course. So tie this in. Nothing fancy. Put your thread back to where you tied off again, keeping the thread in the same area where your head is too, so you don't get kind of mixed up in proportions. You know that this is where your head basically wants to start. This is where your wing is going to tie in. This is where your head is going to start. Now, as you're wrapping this, it's going to crush onto itself for the most part. You can, pull the fibers back as best you can, keep most of the fibers from crushing, and they're kind of splay all over the place, and that's fine. It's just kind of part of the look. Now, I have typically not tied these in purple, so this is sort of a new color for me, but I've seen similar flies since I moved back here to the island, similar muddlers that are done with a purple body here that have been proven to be effective, and I thought this would be a great fly to kind of use that purple theme on. Okay. When we get here, I usually has a tendency to build up pretty good. And I don't want a big bump here, so I'll tie this off on the bottom. And I'll show you why in a second. So I don't want a big bump up on the top, because that's where I'm going to lay the feather in. Okay, kind of just even that out a bit. There we go. So as per the traditional muddler, use the gray squirrel tail. I kind of spirit of keeping it consistent with a muddler, or somewhat with a muddler style. I decided I keep that gray squirrel tail. I don't put a lot in here. The squirrel tail is going to have a tendency to push up, because, like I said, these fibers are going to want to push that wing up, but you can get it lie flat for the most part. The fly is, as you've seen on the example here, the wings don't fly. The wings are not going to lay flat like you would on a typical muddler anyway, just because of the nature of the material. So the wing is around half the length of the tail. Pinch, taper cut. And if I can find my little bit of wax here. Wax your thread. And tie in your squirrel. That's it. Keep a kind of a tapered, flat profile. Don't lay it all the thread into one area here and just create yourself a bump that's going to cause you problems afterwards. Yeah, this wing's probably a little bit, maybe a little bit short, but nothing major. Okay, so the flash in this fly is I use two bits of material. One, I use an ice wing in purple, and then the other is a mirror flash, crinkle mirror flash, actually. and I use that in purple as well. So just again, as an example of storage, I know some people are interested in some of the ways I store my materials. Everybody is interested in that, anybody who ties flies. So I use these. I've only been starting to use these here recently, but I do like them for this material and for Crystal Flash and a few others. And that are these stash pods. There's not a whole lot to them, to be quite honest. But they do work effectively, and I label them, of course, with the colors under. So it keeps things together. You'll see these. You'll find these on the website, or you find them on, you'll find them online and other places as well. But I do have some in stock as well. So purple. You don't need much. This is what I like about this crinkle mirror flash. You only need a few strands here. Really, it's a really brilliant material, I find. I really like it. Oops. Okay. Probably got a few too many there. Use 3 or 4, and then I fold them over, so it makes, doubles them up. So I wrap them in, and then I fold back and cinch them down and cut them off. Now the ice wing. Not a whole lot to this. I'm not sure if I used this before on any other videos or not. It's just a flash fiber, really, and just pull out what you need. Again, less is more, I guess. I don't put a lot of this in. A couple dozen strands, this is pretty wispy stuff. Lay this in, and same idea. Wrap in, pull forward. And you can kind of trim off. You don't want to square it off, just kind of move your scissors along as you're cutting, right? It's probably a little bit long. Okay. Okay, we're still in this general area here with just thread up in here and nothing in the back, right? So really what you're to the point you're to now is to lay in the wing. So the wing, as I said before, as I mentioned, is the opposite side of that quill that I showed you. So this long side. Now, this is where some of these quills, when you buy them, you'll get like you'll get some smaller feathers. The problem with the smaller feathers is for these big flies, like a number 4, number 2, anything with say a 3 or 4x long shank, to get the length that you need for the wing, you need a fairly long feather. And the problem with the shorter ones is you can't use the full length of this feather. And what I mean by that is down in the base of this, the feather, it's the stem, the feather itself is thick at the bottom and thin at the top. And in order to tie this in, you want to be able to utilize probably the first 75% of it. When you get down the bottom and you try to tie in down there to get, say, that full length, your feather is going to always turn on you. You're never going to, you're going to fight with it a lot. Trust me. So clip out enough here, roughly, again, about 3/4 the gap of the hook, somewhere in that area. Again, there's a personal preference, but if you go too thin, it really doesn't look like much of a feather at all. And then you take the opposite feather, same thing. Okay, so what you're going to be left with, unlike the first time when you put them together so they kind of clip together, these you're going to lay them so that they actually splay apart. And what I mean by that is when you put one against the other, they're going to want to flare opposite to each other. Now these quills, or these feathers got they do have a turn into them, so you don't get that perfect profile. Sometimes, you find good ones, you don't have that twist. These here you can see it's got like it's almost like a concave, almost like a concave twist to it. But really, I don't think the trout will mind. Now, as I was saying before, if you had a hook that, you needed to get down into here to get the full length of, to try to tie in down here at the base of this feather, or the base of this quill, you'd never manage it because it would always turn over. It's too thick down here. You want to be able to utilize this first 75%. You can feel it when you use this enough. You'll feel the difference as you get up the feather. So basically, is around there, you'll see a difference, right? And you want this to be roughly the same length to the tip of the tail. So roughly there. So you pinch it where you want to tie in. Okay. I usually spin the thread here just to create, because this thread is fairly flat. This might take a couple of times because you're trying to tie in a fairly substantial feather here in terms of width-wise, so it might take a couple of attempts here to get it to sit right. But don't worry about that. So again, pinch wrap, hold down, pull straight down, kind of see where you are, and then as you wrap forward. And I can see right away that I'm probably going to need to do this again. See? So I'm down. I'm too far down the head. Let's try this again. Here. That's not too bad. You'll see, like as I said before, these quills, these feathers, the wings on this particular fly, they stand up fairly straight as opposed to what you see on a typical muddler. And it's because of the nature of that material. Body material, it's you're laying so much in the wing, plus that polar chenille kind of pushes the wing up a bit. It's not too bad. Turn this off. Yep, it's okay. You could lay put a layer of glue in here as well on top of that if you want. Doesn't hurt. I'm not going to do it in this one just for the sake of time, but I normally do just some regular head cement. Just coat that and let it dry for a few minutes before you finish it off, and you should be good to go. Now to do the head on this, this is a fairly big hook with a fairly big head. Typically what you do with the heads on muddlers, of course, you got the collar and then the head. The collar is normally tied in one single spin. And you could do that on this size of hook, but I like, as I said before at the beginning of this video, I like my collars, my heads really full. So to do that, I've got into sort of the habit over the years, especially with these big muddlers, of tying the collars in by flaring on both sides as opposed to spinning. And I do this for the marabou muddlers as well, which I'll do another video on the marabous. But the head styles are pretty much the same. Now, what I just wrapped in then, I didn't mention it, but what I just put in then is a stronger thread. You could use, you could use Danville's Plus. There's other threads out there. I'm using a UT or a GSP thread. GSP 100, which is what I got into the habit of using. I find it's a good thread and strong. So what I'm using now is just to finish it off, I use a piece of deer, and this is from a Primo strip, which got good quality deer on it. I use a longer pair of scissors when I'm cutting this deer here. I find this is much more convenient. It gets in behind the ear a lot better. So I'm going to tie this collar on in basically 2 clumps, and I'm going to flare it on both sides as opposed to spinning it. And probably in a future video, I'll show the one maybe that I'm using, or one that I do a spinning as opposed to a flaring. And typically, if it's say a size 6 or smaller, 8, 10 like that, then I won't flare on both sides of the hook. I'll spin it. So, one clump of deer. And the deer, you want that deer, tips of the deer fall roughly in line with the tip of the hook. Or with the point of the hook, sorry. So around right there. Hold it with your thumb. I give this GSP a bit of a spin because, like I said, it lies flat. 2 wraps. Let it go and just pull tight. Kind of don't let it roll all the way around. Just let it kind of flare on one side of the hook. And this is where you could, like I say, you do this a few times, you'll get used to how much kind of deer to pull out, to use, to kind of keep the proportions on each side of the hook the same. Is with flaring like this, you know, you could tendency to put more on one side than on the other. Okay, same thing again. Probably a little bit too much. Line those up with the ones you laid in before, and then wrap them in basically in the same spot as you wrapped in the other ones. So you want to try to get in the same, basically right on top of the previous wrap if you can. One, and then kind of pull tight. Keep your thread tension while you're working with this head, while you're working with these fibers, or these here fibers. And then a wrap the head to lock it down, right? That's it. It's not going nowhere now. Yep, everything is staying in place. Like I said, these feathers are a bit delicate, so. Okay. Now your last one is a little bit more hair. Maybe half again as much as you would on a flare on one side. You don't need to stack it because you're going to spin this section. Okay, lay it in. Thread it, spin. A couple of loose wraps. And it should do it. You could whip finish, or you could hand, sorry, you can hand whip finish. Which I've been doing lately with these muddler heads. I find it better to, it's easier to hand whip finish. Okay. Now, the head on these, you could cut these with a pair of scissors. Nothing wrong with it. What I've been doing for many, many years is for all my muddler heads, anything with a deer head, really. I don't use scissors anymore. I use double-edged razor blades. You gotta be careful with them. I've never cut myself on these yet, knock on wood. You can't easily do that though, and you can see why. I mean, you're gripping. What you could do if you want to, you could fold them in half and crack them. I've seen that done. I don't typically do that, but that's one way of doing it. That way you're only holding on the base and you only got one edge to deal with. But anyway, just fair warning, if you're using these blades, be careful with them. So as I said, I use, I cut my muddlers with fairly big heads, with pretty, well, significantly large heads. The way I do that, I don't go right at it. I use a sharp blade. This one happens to be new, or relatively new. And I kind of start almost, it just takes a bit of time. I probably spend a lot more time than is necessary on this. But anyway, I usually start these by cutting almost a vertical line right from the eye. I'm almost going to go vertical. And with a sharp, with a new blade is a lot easier. Once your blade dulls, this becomes a bit of a lot more of a chore. And kind of work your way back along that same sort of profile, keeping everything pretty high up, actually, to keep that head pretty large. Now, as you get closer to the collar, of course, you're going to have a tendency, if you go too crazy with it, you'll cut your collar off. So you need to be aware of that. As you can tell, these heads get pretty big. Okay, I get it to that point, which looks pretty massive, actually. I go in here and I kind of trim out these, even up any of the kind of broke off ends or anything that's uneven, and try to make a fairly decent even collar all the way around. Now, when you're finished doing that, of course, everything looks kind of squared off. So then I use the blade again, and I kind of just blend all that back in again. And again, like I said, if you're tying these for yourself, and you don't necessarily need to kind of spend this kind of effort. I don't think the trout will mind. But these flies are as much a reflection of the time that the person tying them puts into it, and for me, as many tyers out there I know, goes without saying, you want to do a nice job, or at least a job that you're proud of, even if it is typically your for the most part your spin on it or your design, which is what all these flies basically are that I've been tying. A lot of them, they're traditional patterns that have been adapted in some way or another. That's it. That's enough. So there you go. That's the purple version. Now the head is not, it's not a tight, packed head. A little bit of a touch up there, nothing serious. It's not a tight packed head. I only spun one. You could flare another one on top of that. I don't do it on this particular pattern. I do it on a couple of the scoping patterns that I tie, and again, when I get into those videos, I'll show you. That creates a much denser head, which I kind of like. But on these muddlers, I don't mind it so much when they get in the water. That looseness, it gets some air bubbles in there, and I think it adds something to it. And if you watch some of the other videos that are out there, you'll get various opinions on that, of course. But many that I've seen kind of go along with that same kind of line of thinking. For the loosely packed heads. But again, it's a matter of preference, and that's what the beauty thing about this this tying is, that you got the flexibility to do whatever you want for the most part. Particularly in these kind of flies, you're not too much worried about. So I'll put a little bit of head cement in here. But typically that whip finish will hold anyway, but just as a little bit of an added measure. So again, that's the purple version. Again, like I said, the silver, as I said before, there's a little bigger head on the purple version here. I could trim that down a touch bit more if I wanted to. And I probably would in hindsight now. This seems to be probably a much proportional look. But it's up to you, really, and it's simple to do. I'll just take my razor blade, another 60 seconds here, and I could have that head down to basically the same size as this one. But yeah, purple, other colors probably would be would certainly be good. Anything that's good in a muddler. You can mix up the feather. Well, you could tie it in solid turkey feathers if you wanted colors, or you can mix up the deer head color. But typically I haven't. I've kept it the deer as being a natural deer, and same with the quills, and then just kind of alternated the body colors: purple, silver, gold. Like I said, orange would probably be good, and a few others. So that's it for the video today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it, or at least spark some interest in or some spark some techniques that maybe you could adapt to some of the flies that you're doing. If you, like I said, if you appreciate me making these videos and whatnot, and you like the content, and please subscribe to the channel. I really do appreciate it. And if there's certain patterns that you'd like to see me tie, then just drop them in the comment section, and I'll make every effort to do so. Like I said, I typically tie these sort of the more non-traditional patterns, or the ones that are not something you're going to find in every mail house or mail order catalog. But at some point, like I said, I will be getting into the more traditional flies, along the salmon flies, and that particularly. But in the end, if you want to see some of those tied, then by all means drop them in the comments. I'm doing those all the time now. And if you happen to see, I know you can't see this, but if you go to see my desk here, there's a litany of salmon wet flies here that I've got at various stages here that I'm busy trying to put kits together and stuff. So I'm at those all the time as well. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed it. Until next week, have a great one. Thanks. Bye.